9 years after our divorce, my ex-husband returned to my life unexpectedly, seeking forgiveness after realizing a significant misunderstanding that had led to our separation. I am a 38-year-old woman who went through a divorce with my ex-husband, Nick, a 40-year-old man, nearly 9 years ago. Our marriage lasted 3 years, during which Nick was a supportive and caring partner. However, a major misunderstanding caused him to abruptly leave our marriage. He served me with divorce papers just days after our disagreement, not giving me any opportunity to clarify or explain my side of the story. This left me deeply hurt, as he moved on so quickly without ever discovering the truth behind the situation. The pain of his swift decision was so overwhelming that I chose not to contest the divorce, allowing him to leave without a fight. At the time, I was a housewife, fully dedicated to our home and family. One day, everything changed when Nick returned home unexpectedly to find me with my ex-boyfriend, Joe, a 38-year-old man, in our house. Without saying a word, Nick turned around and left, leaving all three of us confused and hurt. Joe and I had known each other from college and had dated for 3 months before I realized my true feelings lay with Nick. Joe had visited our home to invite Nick and me to his upcoming wedding, assuring us there was nothing untoward or suspicious happening. I had no intention of betraying Nick, but he jumped to the worst possible conclusion and left without giving me a chance to explain. I attempted to reach out to him, trying desperately to stop him and clear up the misunderstanding, but he had already driven away as fast as he could and had blocked me on all platforms, leaving me unable to contact him or explain what was truly happening. In the aftermath, I spent the next 2 days in tears and panic, not knowing where Nick was or how to reach him. Joe also tried to contact Nick to help explain the situation, but he too had been blocked. I was shattered by the turn of events but held on to the hope that once Nick's anger subsided, he would return so I could finally set things right and restore our normal lives together. Unfortunately, this never happened. Instead, just a few days later, Nick officially filed for divorce. I was left in a state of devastation, feeling helpless and desperate for a chance to explain everything to him. However, Nick didn't believe I was worthy of such an explanation, and with a heavy heart, I chose not to fight for our marriage anymore. I accepted the divorce proceedings, packed my belongings, and moved in with a friend temporarily until I could secure my own place. It took time, but I managed to regain control of my life, refusing to let myself be consumed by depression over the past events. I remained angry about Nick's actions and felt I deserved a second chance, or at least the opportunity to explain the misunderstanding. Even after 9 years together, he never considered that I might need this chance. I felt deeply betrayed and hurt, but I understood that I had to prioritize my own well-being. I found employment and eventually moved into my own apartment, and by that time, my divorce had been finalized. Although the process was painful and left me with little, I felt a sense of contentment as I focused on moving forward with my life. Shortly after my divorce, I attended Joe's wedding, reconnecting with old friends from college and enjoying myself immensely. As I had anticipated, Nick did not attend, and many of our friends were surprised to learn that Nick and I had separated, as we had always seemed like the couple destined to stay together forever. Attending Joe's wedding turned out to be a pivotal moment in my life because it was there that I met Chris, a 40-year-old man who is now my husband and the father of my daughter. We struck up a conversation at the wedding, and I felt an immediate spark, but I chose to hold back since I had just gone through a divorce and wanted to focus on healing before diving into a new relationship. I decided to take a break from dating, exchanging numbers with Chris but not reaching out for a while. A year later, feeling more stable and ready to date again, I encountered Chris once more at a work-related event, as we both worked in the same industry. I finally agreed to go on a date with him, and 2 years later, we were married. A year after our marriage, we welcomed a daughter, who is now nearly 5 years old. Time had passed since my divorce from Nick, and I had transformed into a new person. So, you can imagine my astonishment when, just a few days ago, Nick appeared at my doorstep out of nowhere. I was still reeling from the shock of his sudden return and had no idea how he had tracked me down. I didn't even bother to investigate further because, frankly, I didn't care. It was the weekend, and both my husband and I were at home with our daughter when the doorbell rang. I was taken aback to see Nick standing outside, holding a bouquet of roses and smiling as if nothing had ever happened between us. Before I could fully grasp the situation, he began to speak, explaining that a few weeks prior, a friend had informed him that Joe was married to someone else, not me. This revelation had made him realize that he had overreacted in the past. He expressed his desire to give our relationship a second chance and asked for forgiveness for whatever he had done wrong. I was utterly speechless. It seemed absurd that he had divorced me based on a misunderstanding all those years ago without seeking the truth. Now, after nearly a decade without any contact, he thought he could simply walk back into my life and be forgiven as if nothing had happened. It was ironic, considering he had previously denied me a second chance. I watched him talk while internally, I was trying to figure out how to respond. My instinct was to slam the door in his face, but that felt too humiliating. Instead, I decided to take a more insulting approach. I told him to wait right there and return to the living room where my husband and daughter were waiting. Without taking the time to explain what had just occurred, I picked up my daughter and instructed Chris to accompany me to the front door. As you can imagine, Nick was horrified when he saw me approaching him with my daughter in my arms and my husband standing behind me. I smiled at him and informed him that he was too late to ask for a second chance, asking him to leave. After a brief moment of silence, he turned around, hurried to his car, and drove away without saying another word. I felt a sense of relief and closure, finally putting to rest the unresolved pain from 9 years ago. Once he was gone, I sat down with Chris to tell him what had happened. I explained that it was Nick and recounted everything he had said. We both found the situation amusing because it was clear that Nick was in over his head if he truly believed that I would accept him back without any questions, especially after all he had done 9 years ago. It baffled me why he thought it was a good idea to spring such a surprise on me without doing any research. Any quick glance at my social media would have revealed that I was now married with a daughter, but Nick had chosen not to look, likely because my accounts were private. He could have reached out to mutual friends to learn about my current life, but instead, he decided to confront me directly. Chris, my husband, recognized Nick's self-centered nature, believing that Nick assumed I would still be waiting for him and would readily accept his return. This assessment was accurate, as Nick had never engaged in a meaningful conversation with Chris. A few days passed without any further contact, and I assumed Nick would leave me alone. However, this morning, I received a message on Facebook from Nick's new account. In it, he expressed that he was incredibly hurt by my rejection and genuinely wanted to apologize for his past actions. He felt that I had mocked him by turning him away and believed that I owed him an apology as well. I chose not to respond to Nick's message because I felt he did not deserve my sympathy or forgiveness, let alone an apology. My husband was right. Nick had always been self-centered, expecting that I would still be waiting for him and ready to accept him back without question. His inability to see beyond himself and understand my feelings was clear. Reflecting on our marriage, I realized that I had ignored many red flags because I was blinded by my love for him. Nick never explicitly stated his jealousy, but his actions spoke volumes. He made it uncomfortable for me to interact with other men, even friends, and insisted that I quit my job to become a full-time housewife, trusting only me to maintain our home while he was away for work. I had willingly given up my well-paying job to be the perfect housewife, but Nick never gave me a chance to explain my side. I always suspected that Nick was particularly jealous of Joe, my first college boyfriend, despite my loyalty to Nick and my commitment to our relationship. After our divorce, it took me a long time to heal and open myself up to love again. Some people accused me of rushing into another relationship, but I believe it was the right decision. Taking a leap of faith led me to Chris, the best husband and a wonderful father to our daughter. I am content with how my life has turned out and have no intention of apologizing to Nick. In fact, I owe him a sort of thanks because if he hadn't left me, I might still be trapped in an unhappy marriage. In an update, I discovered that Nick had been living in Seoul for work over the past few years, having deleted all his social media accounts and lost touch with our old college friends. Only recently had he moved back and connected with a friend who wasn't close to me, which is how he found out about Joe's marriage and ultimately tracked me down. It's still puzzling why he chose to approach me after almost a decade without contact, but I'm now over it. Since I ignored his Facebook message, he hasn't reached out again. I also informed Joe about what happened, and he was equally shocked by Nick's audacity in showing up unannounced and expecting me to take him back while demanding an apology. When my daughter asked about the man at the door, I told her he had the wrong address to avoid causing her any distress. I don't plan to reveal the truth to her unless she discovers it herself, which seems unlikely. In another update, Nick messaged me again after about a week of no contact. Apparently, I had forgotten to block him, which was a mistake given how busy I am with work. In his message, Nick expressed that he still wanted to talk and meet, stating that he didn't mind my being married with a daughter and wanted to give our relationship another try. His insinuation was clear. He wanted me to cheat on my husband with him, which is ironic considering he was the one who left me 9 years ago. I was speechless and appalled by his audacity, immediately warning him to leave and then blocking his number because I have no interest in rekindling our relationship. His inability to understand that I only harbor feelings of hatred towards him, not affection, was frustrating. My family now matters everything to me, and Nick should have respected that instead of trying to manipulate the situation. I find it disgusting how he couldn't grasp that I didn't care for him anymore, and his messages have only reinforced my decision to cut him out of my life completely. In a subsequent update, Nick made another attempt to visit, but this time, I did not open the door without checking who it was. Fortunately, my daughter was out with my husband meeting his parents as I was caught up with work. When I saw it was Nick, I informed him through the door that he needed to leave and was no longer welcome. I believed I had been clear, but he refused to take the hint, stating that he was in town for a few more weeks before moving to another country. He suggested that this would be a convenient time for us to get together, effectively asking me to cheat on my husband. I was appalled and disgusted by his request and told him he had 3 seconds to leave or I would call the police. He didn't take my threat seriously and decided to stay, so I ended up calling the authorities to have him removed. Thankfully, my daughter wasn't present to witness the confrontation, but I immediately informed my husband. Chris returned quickly to ensure I was all right, though I was understandably shaken by the ordeal. I was confused about how Nick had discovered my address, as the friend who informed him about Joe was not close enough to know about my marriage. This left me feeling uneasy and unsafe in my own home, especially with my daughter nearby. We considered increasing our home security and sought advice from Nick's uncle, who works in the police, to determine our next steps. The situation had become unnervingly creepy, and I wanted to avoid finding out what Nick might do next. In another update, I uncovered how Nick had traced me. One of my college friends had inadvertently shared my address with one of Nick's old friends, who then passed it on to Nick. She apologized multiple times upon learning the consequences of her actions, admitting she had forgotten to ask for my permission before sharing my information. I was understandably angry because her negligence had led to a multitude of problems for me and my family. I decided to distance myself from her for the time being, recognizing that it was extremely irresponsible to share someone's address without consent. Fortunately, after the police escorted Nick off our property, I had not heard from him again. However, we were still contemplating moving to a new location to ensure our safety, especially since our daughter attends a nearby school and the entire situation had left me feeling paranoid and anxious. Our daughter was upset at the thought of moving, as she loves our home, making the decision even more challenging. We welcomed any advice on handling this distressing situation while trying to maintain our family's safety and stability. In the latest update, Nick has relocated to Canada, a fact I confirmed through multiple sources, ensuring that he was genuinely gone. He rejoined social media, which allowed others to keep track of his activities. After being escorted out of our home by the police, he sent me a final text from a new number, expressing his continued belief that something could have happened between us that day and that he would wait for me to realize that I still loved him. He dismissed my husband as an obstacle and even offered to adopt my daughter to demonstrate his devotion. Nick provided his Canadian address, suggesting that I reach out when I was ready. I found it unbelievable that he remained so delusional, but at least he was no longer a direct threat. I blocked his new number, finally freeing myself from his incessant attempts to re-enter my life. This decision brought me peace, as we didn't have to move and my daughter could stay in the home she loves. Knowing that Nick is no longer a threat has alleviated my worries, although we continue to maintain our security measures as a precaution. My husband and I read Nick's last message together while enjoying a peaceful evening with our daughter, finding it absurd that he still believed I would want him despite seeing my family and understanding that I have moved on. I shared this with Joe, who reacted similarly, understanding how self-involved Nick truly is. I chose not to reconnect with the friend who shared my address, as her irresponsibility had caused significant distress for me and my family, a betrayal I cannot forgive. To unwind from the recent stress, my husband and I are planning a trip to the beach, our daughter's favorite place, in a few weeks. This getaway is much needed after the past couple of weeks have been extremely stressful. Balancing work and dealing with the aftermath of Nick's actions has taken a toll, and we both need time to relax and rejuvenate. I am immensely grateful for the love and support from everyone during this challenging time. Thank you all for your unwavering support and understanding. Much love to you all.